Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Scrutiny Communities meeting. Before we can proceed, can I make sure that everybody can hear properly? Either have we got many people online?
Only.
Can they hear what we're saying?
Could either Councillor Munt or Denton just confirm that they can? Yes, thank you, Councillor Denton.
Thank you very much. Right, the agenda pack with the papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out early to members. I think there may be a slight alteration on the publish on the website in that the CCTV isn't coming. We'll deal with that in a moment. When I invite someone to speak, could they please clearly state who you are for the benefit of anyone who is listening to the meeting so that they can identify who is speaking. Can I also warmly welcome any members of the public and media who are joining us today. The meeting is being audio recorded by the council. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Okay, we move on to the agenda proper. As I said earlier on, we had an item on CCTV. Unfortunately, the officer who was due to present that is unable to join us today, so that will be deferred to a future meeting. But we have one or two public questions, so the content is going to be pretty much the same in a way. Item 1, apologies for absence. Who do we have apologies from, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Kendall, for whom Councillor Stanton is substituting. We have also received apologies from Councillor Dingwall and Councillor Denton, both of whom are online.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, item 2 is declarations of interest. As you know, we've all got fairly standard declarations of interest, but are there any declarations in relation to the items on today's agenda? Oh, yes, please, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 7 as a member of Homes in Sedgemoor Board.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Duddridge.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Identical to Councillor Pearce, I'm a member of, or board member of Homes in Sedgemoor.
Okay. Very interesting that the councillors are all sort of lined up on one side and the officers on the other. No man's land in the middle. Yes, Councillor Ham.
Oh.
Is your mic on?
I'm pressing the wrong button. Declaring interest as a member of the Homes in Sedgemoor Board.
Okay, thank you very much. No other? Okay, we have minutes from the previous meeting. Draft minutes of the Scrutiny Committee held on the 21st of June in the Wyndham Room next door. Do we have any comments? Minutes? A couple of members who were listening online who were there that day. I don't know whether they've got any views on it. If not, I'm quite happy to accept the minutes and have them signed as a record of the meeting. Okay, proposed, seconded by Councillor myself and seconded by Councillor Coles. Okay, right, we now move on to item 4, which is public question time. We have 2 questions today. Are you going to read them?
Yeah,
or?
right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the first public question was received from Shannon Johnston. Given that housing officers have to work within multiple legal frameworks and do hard and great work, making vastly important decisions, does the committee feel it would be beneficial for their housing and homelessness team to have a programme around what training each staff member should receive? A recent FOI confirmed that there was no policy or recorded data around what training they get.
Okay, thank you. We have Chris Brown here, head of the housing. You happy to respond?
I am happy to respond, yes. I'll read it from my computer screen if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
So the council service response is Housing Options is the service area responsible for managing the council's statutory duties and non-statutory support. And
The feedback somewhere, Chris.
is that any better? Any better?
I have this effect on people.
Okay. Any good? Okay. I will start again. So the housing options is a service area responsible for managing the council's statutory duties and non-statutory support and prevention for households who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, or those who are rough sleeping. Wider service also includes a displaced people service. The service is made up of around 130 posts who previously were employed primarily by 4 former district councils, all of which delivered their service and staff training differently. The service recognises and agrees with the public question that the duties of the team must use a standard and consistent approach. Good induction programmes for new staff and ongoing training and development is essential to ensure this consistency is embedded. The service has prepared a set of common induction materials for the Housing Options Officer role. These materials are now in final draft and will be piloted with new starters in September. The documents will then be adopted for other roles in housing options and displaced persons services and reviewed at regular intervals. The service, through its restructure, which will take place later this year, will help the service bring about greater consistency, as the service will establish a staff structure which is consistent throughout the county, or the county's 4 customer-facing localities. The service will also establish a number of officer posts responsible for establishing consistency of service and decisions. There has been some early success in the delivery of consistency. For example, all locations have moved to one IT case management system in April 2023. Establishing consistency is one of the projects placed in the Housing Transitional Programme, which the service is calling Establish a Consistent Approach to Case Management and Assessment for Housing Options. A range of materials has been developed already, including induction training templates, skill set assessment and training recommendations, new starter plan, housing options onboarding plan. So the service will continue to work hard to deliver a consistent service for all customers who approach the council for support.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, I don't know whether any comments on that from members of the committee listening. I think I've just made a note here that since we're obviously still gelling and coming together as one council, I think it would probably be worthwhile if this scrutiny committee had a look at the issue some way down the line. I think next month might be a little bit premature, but I think in 6 or 8 months, just to revisit this particular subject and see how the service is getting on. Do you think we can arrange that, Chris? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Right. The second question is from Jean Humber. Are you happy to read that?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Is the committee aware of the negative effect their housing policy is having on small communities? I have written to members of the committee individually, briefly explaining a situation that has arisen recently in Withycombe, a small village in West Somerset on the edge of Exmoor. West Somerset has a strong sense of identity, as have the villages within it. The current housing allocation policy attaches no importance to the local connection of an applicant and is unfairly discriminating against those from small communities where housing availability is minimal, almost non-existent. A policy which breaks up a community cannot be right. Already, many young people have to move away because of the lack of job opportunities, but they shouldn't have to move out of their community because they cannot get a house, particularly when they are already established in that community and making a positive contribution to that community. It is one thing when they see no house, quite another when they see it being allocated to someone with no local connection. Without going into the reasons for it, the root cause is too many people chasing too few houses, but that is unlikely to change in the immediate future. Meanwhile, local people in small communities will be unfairly discriminated against when a local connection counts for nothing. Born, bred, living and active in the village, it doesn't get more local than that. I would ask the committee review their housing application policy as a matter of urgency. Members of Withycombe Parish Council would welcome the opportunity to discuss this further.
Right, thank you. I think, as said in the letter, I think most of us on the full committee have received this. On behalf of you, I will be sending the following reply. I have been liaising extensively with Chris and his team, but I will be replying to Ms. Humber as follows. Thank you for your letter of the 31st of July. Some years ago, the then West Somerset Council transferred its council houses to Magna, but the contract only gave West Somerset and its successors limited influence over future operations. This was limited to matters such as proceeds from the sale of previous council stock being reused within the district and a handful of other clauses. Magna, as a registered social landlord, is committed to the provision of well-managed affordable housing and the expectations of the government and regulator as a social housing provider. Our main opportunity to influence Magna is through our relationships and partnership approach. This offers two main opportunities. A, home finder policy. The local connection for the purposes of the home finder policy is defined as the connection to Somerset County Council area rather than specific localities within the council area. This policy has recently been reviewed by the board in consultation with the landlords and was agreed to remain in place as a connection to the wider area. The main reasons for this are: one, to ensure housing need receives higher priority over location, and two, that there is potential for legal challenge on grounds of discrimination where local lettings policies encourage homes to be let to those already established in the community rather than those not established, despite often being in greater housing need. As a partner in Home Finder, the Somerset Council stance aligns to this policy. B, landlord members of Home Finder can choose to introduce local connection criteria, but this is often as a planning approval requirement for new homes, although some landlords do introduce a blanket approach and allow local connection to be focused on much smaller localities. I'm only aware of Falcon Housing Association in the Home Finder scheme applying local connection as a common approach, and should any challenge occur, Falcon would need to justify their policy. Falcon are a very small provider of homes with a rural focus, and therefore they may feel better able to have this policy. Magna could make a policy decision to use local connection more often for localities. However, with such acute demand for housing, there are benefits to the Home Finder service and council in prioritising housing need over locality. I represent a rural community and understand the strength of local feeling over issues like these. All I can say is that the Home Finder system works very well. People do get their needs addressed, even if it takes a little time. I understand from the parish council that another Magna property is shortly to become vacant, and if this family is in the gold band, they're very likely to be in a good position to be offered it. Parish council has asked if the Community Scrutiny Committee can look at the issue of local connection and housing need, and I am liaising with colleagues and will reply shortly. So that's the reply to the letter. In discussions with Chris Brown, he has suggested that the Scrutiny Committee receive a future presentations from the Home Finder service to give us a greater insight into the 10,000 households who are all seeking affordable accommodation. That was 10,000, and I just have real trouble just sort of getting my head around that kind of figure. So we will try and organise a session on Home Finder for this committee as soon as we can. Now, as you know, the current committee cycle is every 2 months. All the Scrutiny Committee chairs have had discussions with Jamie about this because of the volume of business coming through. Jamie, I believe, is meeting his seniors tomorrow to discuss whether the frequency of Scrutiny Committees can be increased. And if we can do that, then we will deal with this more quickly. On the other hand, our next scheduled meeting is October, and therefore I will try and get it on the agenda. Well, I will make sure it's on the agenda for October. If we can do it sooner, we will. Hazel, and then Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. Is it something that actually we need a formal meeting about, or would it be better as an informal briefing where we can chat and so on and talk through the issues, almost like a training session rather than an item at committee?
That's an interesting question, Hazel. I think my concern is that clearly this is a topic of great interest to the general public, and therefore a sort of closed briefing session for councillors, whilst nevertheless valuable, wouldn't necessarily do the trick. I mean, I don't know whether, Chris, we could probably do both. And that might sort of, that would allow a public airing of the issues here through public interaction in a meeting like this, but we would have a committee and other members of the council who were better acquainted with how it is. That might actually work quite well. So I'm asking Chris to have a look at that. Thank you. Dawn.
Thank you. And in advance of that briefing, Chris, I just wanted to ask, because I'm getting an increasing number of queries about the Home Finder service. It's not something I used to get in the numbers I'm getting now, and obviously it's escalating demand for properties. And people in the gold, silver bands are saying that 100 people are going for one property. I just, prior to that meeting, that increased demand.
I believe the county has always had high demand, and high demand has outstripped supply of affordable housing. So we've seen very little growth in affordable housing compared to demand over the last 30 years. So that is a big challenge. So the gap is going to broaden with that. There is a cost of living crisis, and therefore these cost of living crises come and go, fortunately, but they go and then come back again. At the moment, we are in a significant cost of living crisis where more people are finding accommodation costs high. We have some unique things to Somerset. We have 10,000 workers at Hinkley Point C, or about to. Those are using up the private sector accommodation and other accommodation, which otherwise would help people find their own accommodation and would find accommodation closer to their budgets. We've also got a very large displaced persons agenda nationally, and therefore we are seeing that there is clear demands on the local authority to support that agenda, which it wants to do, but this is, bottom line is we need more houses for more people. So there are a number of pressures which are not changing, and they are only getting stronger. We're going to have a paper in a few minutes for some work we're joining up with Children's Services about accommodation and the pressures there with complex 16 to 25-year-olds who need accommodation. So there is a lot of demand, a lot of need, very complex need in some cases, and in other cases not enough move on accommodation to allow people to just take the next step. And yet we are not seeing the supply. We are looking at how we can grow as a local authority in stock and help more people, but that will still be a small percentage of what we need. We work with housing providers, registered providers comprehensively, but again, that cannot keep pace. So we have got a challenge, and nationally, but locally, we have a challenge.
Thank you. Mike Stanton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very well put by Chris. We're all struggling with planning applications where people don't want to build affordable houses, I think. I just had a specific question. I wanted, the briefing that's not to the committee will be for all councillors. Is that what? Yes. Yeah, good. Because. Yeah.
Oh yes, I think that's absolutely essential because as has been said, I think we're all getting the same kind of queries, and so I think everybody needs to be up to speed on this. Hazel.
Just one thing that would be good to have included in the briefing or discussion would be how many social housing, either the council's own or housing associations, do we have statistics for how many homes are in under occupation? In other words, maybe a 3-bedroom house with one or two or a couple living. In other words, their needs are for 1 bedroom, but because I guess there's a lot, and I don't think that maybe our incentives to downsize are maybe good enough. I don't know. Thank you.
That certainly can be included. There are projects and schemes and funding around to help customers downsize, and we'll bring that to you and we'll show the numbers of successes. It might be difficult to be precise because that's difficult information to gather, but we can give you broad thoughts. But we do need to try and encourage downsizing. It is very difficult. If somebody is living in a family home, it is, even with £2,000 incentive, it's a person's family home, so it is very challenging around encouraging that downsizing. But there are initiatives and we can bring them.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'd say is, as a member of a planning committee over the years, it's been, I'm sure Councillor Coles will back me up on this, it's been incredibly disappointing the number of times developers come back to try and reduce the number of affordable housing that has been asked of them. The second point I'd make is that you said that the pressures from Hinkley Point have been around for quite a long time. Must be 10 years, I suppose, in numbers. And it's due to go on for another 4 or 5 potentially. And of course, we have the prospect of another very large development in the same vicinity, which is likely to put increasing pressure. And of course, if that comes concurrently, then we are going to have an escalating problem. Even if it was consecutively, it would be difficult. But I think that's something we do need to bear in mind. Thank you. All right, I've got lots of hands now. Edric, and then Suzanne.
Thank you. Following on from Hazel's comment about people downsizing, are people still given a house for life, or is it reviewed? So if somebody takes the house as a family with 3 young children, if 15 years later they still keep the same house, because maybe I thought that was used by the government, not a popular decision at one point. I thought about people having a shorter term contract and then it was reviewed depending on their needs later on.
But yes, ourselves as a council and most housing associations have the policy of a secure or a short hold tenancy agreement. The secure short hold tenancy agreement gives the customers a lot of protection and doesn't expect them to move part way through or when they're in a certain income bracket. And then it can be lost through the right to buy, which is a significant issue, losing 70 council homes a year. And housing associations have similar policies. It's trying to give security and sustained tenancies, which is very important as well as growth. So yes, we generally have encouraged people to remain there. It may be after a generation that changes, but still it's tied up for maybe even 60 years, you know.
Suzanne?
Oh, hello. I was really just following on from what you said, Councillor Wren. I've heard this a lot as well, sitting on planning, about all, people coming back to try and, for whichever reason, change their allocation of affordable housing as a pro rata to the other commercial housing. Why do we allow them to do that? Can we just not make a blanket rule that is, no, you'll have to reduce your commercial full price properties and not the affordable housing? Sorry, I know that's probably me being simplistic.
Well, no, I mean, it's the right way. I mean, for me, they could pay too much for the land in the first place. I mean, if they paid less for the land in the first place, they could afford to build the houses and make a profit and sell them at a reasonable price. But the system is the wrong way round. I mean, we could have an entire meeting based around that, but I have the present chair of the West Planning Committee who is waving at me. Councillor Coles, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, to agree with your comments, you are quite right. The issue is that we are bound by current planning law, which allows us to set a figure on social housing, or rather affordable housing, and they are entirely different beasts. And then the combination and the split within that is also up for discussion. It is very difficult. Most of the time, developers come back with a viability issue. They say we cannot afford to do this because it doesn't make us the level of profit that our board says the bankers require for us to proceed with that site. It does lead one to wonder sometimes whether it's either A, the wrong site for that developer, or B, they're the wrong developer for that site. It is difficult. Viability is a very, very difficult concept and figures to establish because no two sites are the same. You can, on some sites, have, even brownfield sites, have extraordinary remedial costs in removing, for example, contaminated land. And there's one site a couple of years ago, well, you may remember, they had to truck the contaminated soil up to clay pits in Bedfordshire, one lorry at a time, and it was incredibly expensive. However, that doesn't alter the fact that we need more social housing and we need more affordable housing, and there is a difference between the two. I can bore for Europe if you want me to, Chair.
Simon. I mean, I think, yeah, the point that affordable housing and housing is affordable are the two sides of the coin that you're referring to. In a former life, I used to work as a senior planning advisor, and we did a training session in London on viability. And in those days, this was about 15 years ago, the developers were expected to make a 15% profit. When Somerset Western Taunton gave us a viability session about 18 months ago, lo and behold, the profit margin expanded to 20, the acceptable profit margin expanded to 20%, or 22. And I've never really understood how that works, other than, well, anyway, there we go. And so the system, I'm afraid, is loaded. But there we go. Susanna, you want to follow up?
Sorry, I mean, I know this probably isn't a popular, but I think two things. I think one, laws can be changed. So if it's about planning laws, then somebody somewhere at some point has to go, this law needs to be changed. Number one. And number two, as a council, we're not here to guarantee profits to builders. So if their business model is poor and their, figures that they gather together at the beginning turn out to be wrong, then that's bad luck. That's their business. I feel like they are disingenuous. I feel like they come along to planning, promise X number of affordable housing, knowing that they can change it around later on. Maybe I'm just difficult, but that's what it seems like to me.
Well, I mean, what a thing to say, eh? Goodness me. Yeah, and the current legislation controlled by the current government, who have reasonably good relations with the building industry, shall we say, is where we are. And I mean, the problem is, I mean, the council could refuse these things and refuse to do this. And if they got appealed and the inspector agreed with the developer's figures that it was no longer viable, and this feeds back in, if you're paying £1 million an acre to buy development land, then you're going to have to make a profit on that. You're going to have to make quite a lot on the other end. Whereas actually, if you only paid 100,000, and that's back in the 70s, the Labour government at the time set up what they called a development land tax, which was hugely unpopular. But I think the system is badly skewed. We're going way off topic here anyway. So I'm going to call a halt to that. I think it's something, and it's probably not within the purview of this committee. I think it's probably climate and place, isn't it? Planning and viability. So I might have a word with Martin about looking at that in a bit more detail. In the meantime, Dawn, would you like to have the final say on this topic?
Love to. Yeah, I mean, just to say it's down to power balances, and unfortunately the developers seem to have the power in this, in terms of saying they'd pull the shots if, we need the houses. So, you're not in a very strong position when a developer is saying we're not going to deliver it if we don't get a lower quota. My only hope is that developers' properties are not selling as well as they were, and maybe there are some more arrangements that could be looked at with companies like Live West to switch some of their housing once it's underway. But definitely, we need to keep working with these developers to get them to deliver what we need.
Thanks, Dawn. Hazel, were you? No? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for your responses. We'll get those letters out and responses back, and we will look at Home Finder at a meeting in the near future, and also set up an all-councillor briefing as well. Right, item 5, recommissioning of 16 plus housing and supported accommodation, which are on pages 13 to 26 of the agenda. We have a presentation on the recommissioning of this. Julie is going to present it, and Richard is going to introduce it. Richard.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So we're here to share progress on our appointing providers to deliver housing related support and accommodation for 16 to 25-year-olds. This replaces our current P2I Pathways to Independence service, and some complex services as well. But we wanted to give you a bit of context first, and then we'll go into presentation. So as we said earlier, this is a really difficult financial period. We've got quite a lot of pressure from central government, so changes such as new regulations on 16, 17-year-old placements, a lack of capacity in the system. So that means that, for instance, young people requiring secure accommodation or tier 4 mental health supports. Some of that's not available now, and that has a knock-on effect of pressure across the whole system, and some challenging behaviours in the market that we see as well. With some providers taking children with lower levels of needs, and that reduces, so they'll prioritise children with lower levels of needs, and that reduces the sufficiency in the market as well. And of course, we've got this huge financial pressure in the market, with some providers taking children with huge financial pressure on families. So they're going through a second cost of living crisis at the moment. So those that have taken on debt in the last 6 months will now be needing to repay that debt, and that's having a big impact as well. So it's in this context that we are doing the best we can really to improve that support for young people, as well as getting on top of the rising costs and the financial risks as well that we have. So for the 16 plus accommodation, we have both current Pathways to Independence service, so the P2I service, and a significant amount of spot purchasing that I mentioned for young people with more complex needs. So what we're doing, because of the current market, we need to bring that together into a block contract to incentivise providers to lower their prices and be more competitive, really. And we were talking about that competition earlier. We're partway through a tender process. So we've had a great response from the market, but that's probably about all we can say, really. So because we're in that tender process, there'll be some questions which we can't answer due to procurement rules, but we'll try and answer as much as we can as we go through. And I should mention this is a joint procurement with housing colleagues, and Chris Brown is here. And I'll pass over briefly to Chris before we come back to Julie.
Yes, I think just a few words from me about the joint procurement. I think it's a great opportunity at the beginning of the life of the new council to show how the broader services which the council now provides can work together and make sense of some very difficult challenges, really. So the districts previously have benefited from the work of the county council in leading on support for young people 16 to 25s and their housing needs. From next April, that will be more shared, and the housing service will manage its responsibilities correctly, and will benefit through this procurement by having some providers for accommodation that we can use. My teams are involved very much with Julie and Richard and Lucy and others who've been very thorough in this procurement process. So hopefully when we come through this procurement process, we will have service providers able to offer the right level of support and a good chunk of accommodation that we need to support those duties that we have. So it's been a good process, very good to see it very early on in the council's life, and it does show how there are opportunities very much with the way in which we need to work going forward, and we hope to expand that in the way we link our accommodation thoughts for both adults, children's, public health. So it's been a positive process. There are risks for housing. First of all, monies will be shifting, so monies which previously have been provided by the county council previously will need to be redistributed within from children's to housing. So that's a process we've got to go through, and we don't know yet the full cost of this accommodation, really, so we might find some uplift in costs. So there are some risks. So there's lots of discussions once we conclude the procurement to say what do we need to do around budgets and where do we need to place those budgets. But as far as process, it has been a good process and a joined up process.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Julie, do you want to take us through the presentation?
Thank you, Chris. Morning all, my name's Julie Breeze. I'm a Strategic Commissioner in Children's with a role around children in care and care leavers, and I'll do my best to take you through. This is quite a complex procurement, so please feel free to ask questions at the end. And I'm going to have to keep nodding at Michelle to do the next slide, please. Thanks, Michelle. So this is the Council's statutory response to the prevention of youth homelessness. So this is for our 16 to 25-year-olds. There's different statutory responsibilities. So next slide, please, Michelle. So it gets quite complex around some of the housing legislation around this. So for our 16 and 17-year-olds, they will fall under the responsibility of children's services. Those young people will either be in care at the local authority or they'll be a care leaver. Next slide, please. Then it gets a bit more complicated as they get older. So once young people reach the age of 18 to 20, they can either choose to sort of still be a care leaver. But there'll also be other young people that are not known to children's services at all. So some of our young people will just present to our housing teams, so more on Chris's side, and they'll be deemed in priority needs, so we'll have to find them accommodation. So it is quite complicated in that this group of young people can fit under different legislation. So I'm not going to go through those tables in detail, but if you are interested in reading lots of complex legislation, there's a helpful guide there. So next slide, please. So just to describe the current service, so you get a sense of what's in place now. As Richard mentioned, this is the Pathways to Independence service, so we refer to it as P2I. And it's very much, as it explains, it's a pathway for young people to get into independence. So it delivers a current sort of range of housing related support and accommodation. A lot of our young people are not ready to live on their own yet, so they'll still need different levels of support going in. Some of those will be 24/7. Some of those will just be staff dropping in twice a day, once a week, etc. So it just depends on their need. And it supports young people really to develop their tenancy and make sure they're ready to move on to live independently, which can either be, in some cases, they'll go back home. Others will go into the private rented sector. So there's lots of different routes for young people. If young people do find themselves homeless, they can either ring the council's call centre and they'll be signposted to either the housing options team, or if out of hours, that'll come through our emergency duty team. So I just wanted to assure Scrutiny that there are places for young people to go, and obviously if they're known to children's services, then they'll go through their key worker. So this is quite a complex cohort of young people. This group will have faced quite a lot of family disruption in their life. They'll be exhibiting quite a lot of complex behaviours in some cases, and they can be quite, they've been through a lot of disruption in their life, so that there's lots of different complexities which I'll talk through later on. The current P2I service commenced in April 2017, and the current contract is due to end at the end of March 24. So this new service that we're commissioning will be in place from April 24. It's currently delivered by 2 YMCAs in Somerset. So YMCA Dulverton Group take one half of the county, so they're sort of Taunton, West Somerset and Bridgewater, and YMCA Brunel Group take the other half, which is sort of South Somerset and the Mendip area. 2 very good providers have delivered very good value for money. We've been through COVID with them, so they are two very valued providers. They deliver a range of accommodation. It's around 179 beds. That can be delivered through shared houses, flats, foyers. We've got 2 quite large foyers, one in Street, one in Froome. So we've got different ranges and different types of accommodation. Some young people prefer to live in a small shared house. Some prefer to live on their own, and some prefer that sort of foyer, large communal area type approach. So we try and do our best to put lots of, a range of accommodation in place. Within this new service, we're also going to be putting in some separate contractual arrangements for our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So we have a statutory responsibility to look after those young people as well. So that's quite a hard thing to manage for us. We don't often know how many are going to be arriving. So we do our best to plan for that as well. So lots of complexities around that. And there's lots of statutory duties around this, so it helps the council meet their Homelessness Act legislation, the Children Act and the Care Act. So there's lots of legislation around this. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides. Oh, it's gone blank on there. Oh, it's over there. Sorry, I was looking over there. So the next 2 slides just really give Scrutiny an idea of the types of support that these young people are needing. So this is an example of Georgie, who is 19. Georgie's anxieties, she's very overwhelmed, and lots of complexity around Georgie. Sometimes not in work, some of these young people. We do our best, and the current providers, to get our young people into some form of education, employment or training, but there'll be a lot of complexities around, and Georgie's really struggling financially. There's no trust in council services, and she doesn't have much of a support network nearby. So it just gives you a flavour of some of the complexities of some of our young people. Next slide. So Joe is one of our sort of high support needs. Is an example of Joe. So we try and group young people into sort of low, medium and high needs, depending on their complexities. Joe is really struggling as well. He doesn't have much of a support network. Again, he's got a lot of different professionals in his life. He's involved in county lines, and it's quite hard to get Joe out of county lines because he can earn more in county lines than working. So there's a lot of complexities around that. So it just gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the young people that are in this service. Next slide, please. So the pathways to independent service is very much an indicative pathway. So if everything goes smoothly, our young people come into the service, they'll be in there around 9 months, and then they'll be supported to move on and live independently. The service has worked really well over the last couple of years. So you'll see there, you know, we're up in the 70s in terms of that moving on positively. I always get asked what happens to the ones that don't. You know, some of our young people don't pay their rent. They cause a lot of damage. They will threaten some of the staff or other residents. It may not always be safe for them to live there. And, you know, so there are some young people that don't move on that we continue to work with and support. We've talked quite a lot already this morning about the housing pressures around Hinkley Point. You know, we do have a lot of pressures around housing. And obviously young people are competing with working adults. So there's a lot of competition, and, you know, a lot of our young people are at quite a significant disadvantage when they're competing with lots of other adults and families. Next slide, please. So this table just gives you an idea of how many of our residents have been in P2I for longer than that sort of indicative 9-month pathway. It's not really a measure. It's more of a measure than a target. You know, we don't expect people to move out one day after 9 months, but it's a helpful indication of how well some of our young people are doing. And we do know that because of that high demand and low supply of social and private sector housing, that is a pressure for our young people. There isn't much, and Chris mentioned it earlier, there's not many options for them to move on to. Next slide, please. So this table just, again, gives reassurance that, you know, a healthy percentage of our young people are engaging really well with this service. They make really good progress against their goals. More than half are working towards what we call a tenancy accreditation scheme. So that gives young people a bit of a plan to work through, you know, how are they maintaining their tenancies? Are they affording it? Are they able to cook and live and change a light bulb, etc., etc.? More than a third are in employment, and almost a fifth are in education or training. You know, we need to recognise that some of our young people are not ready for employment, education or training. So, you know, the providers do a really, really good job of getting those ready. The text on the right there just gives you a sort of some evidence around some of the vulnerabilities that a lot of our young people are suffering with. So they're sort of in numerical order. So, you know, 89% are involved and have offending behaviours. 65% are suffering with their mental health. You know, nearly half are around experiencing some form of exploitation, either criminal or sexual. So this is a complex cohort of young people here. Next slide. So this moves a bit more into the financial considerations. So the current P2I service has a value of around 2.4 million. That is very good value for money. Some of our young people that are coming through are too complex for that service. So we do spend around £7 million a year on some different arrangements for those young people because of their complexity and their needs. So it's, as Richard alluded to, it's quite a difficult market to work in. These are complex young people that some of our providers are working with. So this procurement exercise will be used to determine the costs for both children's and housing so that we can allocate those budgets appropriately. We will know the costs by around October. So this decision is coming to executive on the 4th of October. So as Richard said, we are currently in that procurement exercise at the moment. The graph on the right there just shows the different statutory responsibilities. So the blue line is those young people that fall under children's services, so they'll be in care or a care leaver. And the orange line shows those young people that are deemed in priority need and come under the housing service. So it's pretty much 50-50. It's starting over the last sort of couple of years, since around 2019. It's a sort of quite a 50-50 split between those two services. As Richard mentioned, the Department for Education are regulating this service from October this year. So quite rightly, the DFE have acknowledged that some of our 16 and 17-year-olds need to be in some form of regulated accommodation. So that's quite a big change for us as a council and for those providers as well. And we had Ofsted here yesterday explaining how that's all going to work. Next slide, please. So this table just shows the new contractual structure that we'll be putting in place that we've gone out to the market for. So the top of that table is we're going out for 2 block contracts. So lot 1 there is the supported accommodation for our 16 to 25-year-olds that are in care and care leavers. So that's 100 beds that are available in that block contract. And then lot 2 is for those same cohort, but for 18 to 25-year-olds who are not in care. That's probably the easiest way to look at that. We've had to split it because of the legislation, because some providers will not want to register with Ofsted and some will. So that's the reason behind their split. So those 2 block contracts will give us some continuity. It will give us some controlled costs. We'll know exactly how much we're paying for those beds. So there won't be so much ambiguity. You know, we'll have a better control of costs. The contract that we're putting in place is for 9 years. So that's given some longevity to our Somerset providers as well. That's been really welcomed by the market. There are the normal break clauses if we need to get out of any of those, but I think it's important to give that sort of longevity to our providers. The bottom half of the table gives us a bit more flexibility. So we're putting in place what we call a dynamic purchasing system, a DPS. That gives us a quicker route to the market if we need some additional beds. So once those 2 blocks get full up, which they probably will, it's a bit of a, you know, we weren't sure how many beds to go out for, but that feels like a good number for those blocks. But if they do get full up, we've got another quicker route out to the market. And those providers will have already been through some sort of due diligence, will know that they are safe, secure, good value for money providers, and we can just use that DPS to run sort of mini competitions to go out and find additional beds. So I hope I've explained that well enough. And within that, that's also, we will use the DPS for our unaccompanied asylum seeking children as well. The reason those unaccompanied asylum children aren't in a block is that we don't often know how many are arriving in Somerset, so we need that flexibility. And then the final slide, that just gives members an idea of the timeline. So we are evaluating and being moderated at the moment on the tenders. The key decision comes on the 4th of October. We've then got a 5-month mobilisation period, which is really important. That's when providers will be securing properties, will be in regular dialogue with those successful providers, and the new contract will start on the 1st of April 2024. Oh, I'll pause there. Sorry, I felt like that was a lot of information.
Yeah, yes, that's
pause
tremendous.
there for a second for any questions.
Tremendous, Julie. Thank you very much. That was, yes, an awful lot to get through. I don't know whether members of the committee would benefit from having the presentation emailed to them afterwards, so we could read it. It's on ModGov already, is it?
Oh, it wasn't on there.
Okay. Fine. Do I have any questions? Hazel?
Just a nitpicking moan. I couldn't read the screen, so I got it on ModGov and I've been following it there. But I think if I remember the public sitting in this room, I would struggle. I wondered if I was at home following it and the screen was being shared by you, you can't then enlarge. I can read it because I can make it bigger. It's an issue about legibility, that's all. But I think it's a really great scale, and you've done an awful lot of work on that, and I've been involved many, many years ago, and it is a very complex and difficult area, but that sounds very good to me. Thank you.
Kathy?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the presentation, because I realised just a bit of how complex this whole area is. But it was just on page 22 of the slides, and the progress of young people in pathways to independence, and there were 2 sets of figures about sort of progress and then things where things didn't go so well, and I'm sort of just struggling to understand the percentages, where they're at sort of 83% making progress on personal goals, but 89% currently at risk of offending behaviours. And I know it's not a sort of straight pathway and things can veer, in life's, life's pathway. But it's just, could you explain that a little bit more, please? And also, because the impacts, apart from the young people themselves and family and those around them, but for other agencies as well, it'd be useful to know the role for other agencies in supporting this council in making provision to support young people who have troubled lives, please.
Okay, I'll do my best to answer that one for you. So the table on the left, really, so we have regular contract reviews with the 2 YMCA providers, and that's just some of the measures that we use. I don't really know how I can explain that anymore, really. And I think I added the information on the right just to try and explain that some of the vulnerabilities that some of our young people are suffering with. In terms of the multi-agency stuff, we are very heavily engaged with our Somerset Drug and Alcohol Service. We work regularly with the police. We have a nursing outreach team that go out to some of the P2I projects. I'm trying to think of some of the other agencies we work regularly with. Top of my head, but it's mainly drug and alcohol services. As part of this new service, we're going to be redesigning the domestic abuse pathway as well, just to make sure young people are getting the right support they need. We have done, to help us understand what we needed to commission this time, we did a series of pilots where we trialled lots of different providers coming in to help. So we did a huge piece of work around well-being. So we took groups of young people out to, walk up the Brendan Hills. And so there's a lot of well-being stuff that we're trying to get in place as well with this new service. I don't know if that's answered fully enough or not, Kathy.
Partly, we could probably be all day, couldn't we,
Yeah,
really, but that gives a flavour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dawn?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. I'm just trying to get my head around the accommodation provision, because we've been hearing about how many problems there are in the market at the moment to get properties. And how does that work with the increasing need with taking the asylum seekers? Is there a link with Home Finder here at all, or is it separated? And I understand that the YMCA are providing the accommodation, but are there escalating costs because there is this real problem in the market to get the properties? Just trying to understand a bit more how the having sufficient accommodation works.
Okay, so the accommodation we've got currently is all over Somerset, lots of different types of accommodation. The 7 million I mentioned, so there's a lot of other arrangements that we put in place. Some of our local providers, we've only got quite a specialist group of providers that work with our unaccompanied asylum seeking children. It gets quite complicated because when they arrive here, we have to then go through this right to remain with them as well. So it's quite hard for some of them to transfer into permanent accommodation because of their right to remain. So that it's quite a complex picture. So the YMCAs aren't currently providing the US accommodation. We go to other providers for that at the moment, but this new contract will put all of that in place. I've explained that well enough.
Yeah. Sorry, and just on the Home Finder thing, is there any connection between the two areas at all, or are these completely separate?
Thank you. So from my perspective, I think the front door is often where people are in high need and have got a need for accommodation quite urgently. So young people presenting to housing will have a need potentially that day, that week, coming up soon. And we need to make sure that we try and sustain them in their accommodation if that's possible, or find some form of accommodation for them to be in whilst we review their case, if we believe that that is a responsibility on us. So often these cases, which this procurement will do, will help us provide the provision to help us for a period of time, short or medium term, to actually make sure those people are not without a roof. And then Home Finder comes in really as the solution for more long-term permanent. Some of these customers will be very able and will just have a situation with accommodation. They'll be able to manage a tenancy, and through Home Finder, hopefully there'll be opportunities for them to get that tenancy, and that will be their solution, which means that we don't have to do emergency support for them. They will act independently. Others won't find that very easily. A home finder might not have accommodation which suits their need. They might not be able to sustain a tenancy, and therefore we need to have accommodation which manages those needs until we can find opportunities. They might have a longer period of support required in order to maintain them in accommodation and not put them at risk and such. So there are links, but this is generally, in my view, the front door, certainly for housing, and people may stay in this accommodation for different periods of time until they're able to move on. And some people might even find it difficult sustaining this tenancy, and there are different routes that they have to go down. So it is a complex picture, but home finder tends to be the more stable, longer term accommodation. These are the more managing the immediate need and support needs.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, that really helpful. So I'm also trying to understand with the P2I and the ones that aren't ready for that, is there a time scale on how long they have to not move on or progress somewhere else? And also what happens at 25?
So I think the indicative is 9 months, but young people sometimes aren't ready. So, I mean, I can probably get some more data on how long some of our young people have been in P2I. I haven't got it to hand, but I can provide some extra data if that's helpful. We do have a very small group of young people that have been in P2I for a longer than that 9-month pathway. This current service ends on their 25th birthday. So I think at this current time, we have 3 young people that are still in the service at age 25. So we do work really hard to get them into, you know, the independent sector by the time they're 25.
Okay. Edric?
Thank you. Now, I'm looking at the figures again, which Kathy alluded to earlier. And first of all, I noticed and I thought, oh, only 12.4% seeking employment. Then I realized that figure's not as bad as it looks, is because if 36 are in employment and 17% are in education, do I assume if half of them are actually in education or employment, is that a 12.5% figure of the remainder, 12.5% of the whole lot? Because it was 12.5% remainder, that's actually maybe more like 25% is actively seeking employment. So that those figures don't look very good unless you extrapolate more information. Is that correct? So they're actually way better than they look. If you take into consideration maybe mental health issues, physical disability and learning difficulties, I think we're actually doing quite well. Would that be correct? And maybe if the members of the public saw this, they think we weren't doing a very good job as a council. So maybe we need to big ourselves up as an organisation a bit better and extrapolate more information on those figures. Would that be correct?
Yeah, you've interpreted that correctly. It's really hard with data because if I just give you a little bit, you'll ask for more. So I never know how much data to provide. Yes, you're absolutely right. If you add that up, we're actually doing really well with this group of young people.
Okay, no other hands up. I've just got a couple of points really. I mean, I'll beg your pardon. Oh, sorry, John, I do beg your pardon.
Julie, Chris, thank you. That was a good presentation. Dawn actually covered a couple of bits that I was going to ask. In terms of asylum seekers, one assumes they would get priority, would they not? Once they arrive here, into over and above people actually living, well, or not living here, whichever way you put that. I was concerned also about the 90 beds. If you add the 22 as well to that, which are non-care, it doesn't sound very many. Is that enough? My final question, which you kind of answered actually as you were doing your presentation, but there's around 20% plus who are kind of left behind here with the between 70 and 80% who are okay and they're fine. So there's those, and there's also, I assume, certain young people who don't want our help, who outright refuse it. So what do we do with those guys, the over the 20% and that refusal amount? I mean, do they just get handled by the police, or what happens to them? Because if they're in need somewhere, they have to be covered, and I'm not quite sure how that works. Thank you.
Okay, so the US priority, so This is dealt with by the National Transfer Scheme. So this is our probably 16 and 17-year-olds. They tend to be males. It's quite, how it happens is a spreadsheet is sent and we choose our quota. And then those young people will then arrange the accommodation for them so that when they arrive in Somerset, we know where they're going. Does that answer that bit of your question? What's the next bit?
20% left behind.
The 20% that get left behind, we just continue to work with them. We don't give up on our young people. So, I mean, if they have caused extensive damage and threatened staff, they will be evicted. You know, we give young people lots of chances, but, you know, there does come a point when we will have to evict. Trying to think, sorry, I'm trying to remember your questions. My short-term memory is terrible.
And young people who don't want help.
So the young people who don't want help, quite a hard question to answer. I mean, we do as much as we can to help our young people. Have you got any sort of examples of?
No real example. I'm just thinking about people. I could give an example, but I won't because it's a bit close to home here. But where a young person is saying, no, I don't want the council's help, thank you very much. And actually they have nowhere to live, nowhere to sleep. And they've had previous with the police, involved with county lines, which I think you mentioned as well. I think the concern is when so they don't pay their rent was the other part of that. So they obviously get thrown out, and I accept that. But so where do they go? I mean, do they end up in tents on, you know, on a moorland area, or that's the concern, is where these people, where do they disappear? I don't, it seems like, I appreciate we're keeping tabs on them, but very hard to keep tabs on people who don't want help.
Sorry, it is a challenging question to answer, and I think we can't blue trace people necessarily when they fall out of the system. So, you know, we do have circumstances where we've ended duty and we know that the person's still around and, you know, managing a sofa surf for a number of weeks, but it's not a good environment. It's not what they need. So it is challenging. I think maybe we need to provide you with a bit more detail about what the safeguards are, if any. But there is I suppose, dialogue going on within the council between public health, adult services, children's services and housing about where the line draws. Housing has a duty, the other services have a duty. What happens if you're just outside that duty? We've done all we can, we think, but that person is still going to be struggling and their life experience is going to be, you know, worse. Sorry, just whilst I'm on the mic, just to say the Home Finder is just one of the solutions for answers to the longer term. Private rented sector, family circumstances changing to allow people to return home. You know, it's not all about, you know, the structure's responsibility or capacity. There's lots of other capacity which young people and others do work with to find their longer term solutions.
Thanks for that, guys. That does make sense. The other thing that springs to mind while you were talking, I noted reading the briefing that it was parents are expected to give their permission, one or both parents, if there are both parents, when a young person's under 18. What if the parents don't give that permission? Because I imagine that happens occasionally. Do you then have the power to say, well, I'm sorry, but actually your child does need help. We are going to provide them with help if they would like it. Is that the case with that?
No, it's fine. I'm just trying to answer it correctly. So for 16 and 17-year-olds, they can choose to come into care. So obviously the social care teams would go out and talk to family. We do have a really good family group conferencing service in Somerset that we try and get young people back home again, and we look at wider family connections as well. But ultimately, they do sometimes, if that 16 or 17-year-old isn't safe in that home, then social care will go in and support them to live somewhere else ultimately. Under 16s, same, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Wes and then Dawn. Wes?
Thank you, Chair. Julie, very good presentation. When you were at page 24 then, of those slides, you mentioned there was an Ofsted barrier in effect, really, I think, in lot either 1 or 2. Could you explain a bit more about that, please? The one in effect had control of Ofsted and one didn't. And that's what you said.
So this is about, I think, registration of 16, 17-year-old placement. So, so that's been a recent change of legislation that Department for Education's brought in. Ofsted's been preparing that and working with the market. And from October, every placement will start being registered, and I think that's through till April, is it?
Yeah,
that there's a kind of transition phase. So obviously for this new service coming in, all those different placements will need to be registered with Ofsted. That does add additional costs. We've had some projections of that; they're quite high, unfortunately. So that will affect the the overall cost of services. And we had Ofsted here yesterday with providers, about 25, 30 providers, here just discussing kind of those changes, and we're sort of trying to help the market to shift hopefully fairly painlessly into being able to provide the information and go through the registration process.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Cool.
Mine was on a similar theme to that. I'm just trying to sort of get my head around the trajectory of this going forward in years to come. Are the numbers increasing for children in need of this support? And have you got any idea on how that's going to escalate in terms of the cost to the council? And this government registration requirement, are they funding that? Are they expecting councils to find that money somehow? It seems a bit scary in some ways, where that's going to go going forwards.
So I would say our children in care numbers have remained relatively stable in Somerset. What we are seeing is older young people coming into care, so sort of 16 and 17-year-olds, we are seeing an increase in that. Is that fair to say? In terms of the trajectory, what we are doing, we do annual sort of needs analysis, and what that is starting to tell us is the complexity is going up. I think the cost of living pressures, we are still coming out of a pandemic, so we are seeing complexity go up. So I think the numbers are staying the same, but the complexity is going up, I would say.
Yeah. Can I add in as well that that's why we've got a block contract, which will help to kind of manage our risks in terms of costs over coming years, but also a dynamic purchasing system to go alongside that, which means that we can flex and expand as needed. But no, the government doesn't necessarily provide any additional funding for things like cost of living crises and pandemics having such a big impact on complexity and costs. And at the same time, we've got a very difficult marketplace as well.
Right, thank you. I can't see any other hands up. I've got a couple of questions of my own. I think on the first slide, one of the points for discussion was the integration and collaboration between children's services and housing, and how LGR was going to help towards that. I'm just asking, how is that going, really? Bearing in mind we're 3 or 4 months into the new council, and whilst the top layers may have been sorted out, the transformation for other members of staff is ongoing. I was just wondering just how it's going, really.
Well, I think it started off well. I think this is a really good example of how the two organisations and people within the service are working together to produce something which will better both services and the customer. So I think we can point to this as an early start, and that's really good. There are lots of conversations going on. Most of the conversations are around the key themes which we both share. How do we prevent people from becoming at risk of losing their home and losing a stable housing environment? So there's a lot of common dialogue with adults, public health and children's with housing on that. And there is also the growth, because ultimately we are just treading water and it's partly sinking because of the lack of growth. So are there new models and opportunities that housing can show and help bring to adults and children's and public health to say it's a better way of working? And there will be growth papers coming forward to the council, and you might want to explore those to say how can we do things differently, because we have got broader range of commitment now, all of us in our services. Yesterday I heard an email from another colleague in children's services where there is a number probably 12 really, really expensive accommodation cases. And those are the ones that we can also focus on. Are there some very bespoke solutions that we can do using capital to stop very expensive revenue costs? So we can do that on a small scale of 12. It would be lovely if the council decided it would like to do it on a larger scale of 500, 1,000. Now we're one unitary. Those sorts of ambitions are possible, albeit pinched with a bit of reality of where we are financially at the moment. But capital into help revenue is a key area that I think housing helps bring to adults, children's and public health. So that's from my perspective. I think it's a very positive one. I think also it's fair to say that there are slightly different cultures. So very much person-centred, 100% children's, adults and such, quite rightly. In housing, perhaps a little bit more duty-based. So we're learning to see how we can flex that and what models we can bring in better support, longer term support, which isn't just purely around duty. We do that already, and our people are people-based, but the service is probably a little bit more structured on duty. And I'm sure children's and adults and public health are saying, you know, what do they need to consider in these grey areas in between duty and our wish to actually give people a better life.
Are there any tensions between the fact that sort of the housing was centred in Taunton to an extent in Bridgewater and there was no sort of social housing elsewhere? Or is that because, you know, there's a clear divide there in terms of bringing teams together and, as you say, culture and outlook?
So I don't think there are any locality tensions, because I think in reality we are looking at how we deliver on a county-wide basis. The difference you're probably referring to is that we have more opportunity as a council with our housing stock, which is generally in the north of the county area and in the west. That gives us 10,000 houses, which we can flex a little bit more. We can look at solutions a little bit more directly there. And in the south and the east, we have to work more with housing associations and do things in a more challenging way. There isn't a tension, because I think the service on both sides, it's a county-wide service. It just has slightly different, or significantly different in some cases, opportunities to bring solutions forward in different localities. I think with the children's service, but I might be speaking out of turn, I think with younger people, the opportunity to provide accommodation in a broader area is easier than maybe more established families, which are needing to be a bit more focused around schools, etc.
And the second thing is, clearly we're going into this new contract we're procuring at the moment. There is a chance, presumably, that the provider will change. And I just wondered what plans you have for a handover or transition from the current providers into new ones. I find I probably should know this as to actually the accommodation you were talking about, the beds you provide. I don't know whether they're ours or whether they're directly provided by the provider or they're going to be handed over. How do you see that transition working? Bearing in mind you're going to have what 6 months really?
So we are in regular contact with the what they call the incumbent providers. So we met with them yesterday. We are keeping in regular dialogue with them. As and when we announce the successful providers, there'll be a detailed transition plan in place for all of the individual young people. As part of the procurement process, what we do is we ask the current providers for all of their property details, so we know when the leases are ending, do they own them, you know, what's happening with each and every single property. So there are plans in place to work through that, but until we know who the successful providers are, but there are, just to assure you, there are plans in place.
Okay, I mean, I think clearly what everybody here would be concerned about is there being a hiatus or a gap on the 1st of April. So I mean, clearly that's the thing we all need to be focusing on. So when's the was it October? The executive's taking the decision in October, and when are the providers going to be informed?
So once it's gone through full key decision, then we'll inform the providers, and we'll have to go a sort of 7-day standstill period. And that's why we've built in the 5-month contract mobilisation, just to allow for that.
Fine. Yes, Dawn.
And just on that basis, I'm just curious then, sort of what are the issues for a provider? What are the challenges for a provider? What are the issues that tend to come up, and whether that's been well delivered or not?
So there's probably lots of challenges for providers. One of them will be recruitment. There will be opportunities. So if the incumbent provider isn't successful, then we'll have to look at 2P implications. So they'll also have to secure property. And they will, recruitment's quite a challenge as well at the moment. There's quite a challenging, there are gaps in some of the recruitment areas. So they have got some challenges, which is why, you know, that 5-month mobilisation is quite key, really.
Thank you. Well, I mean, as you say, having an individual plan for each of the children is paramount here, so that we don't lose anything anywhere. Good. Thank you very much, Richard and Julie. That's brilliant. And thank you, Chris, for your support. Are there any final questions before we move on? Okay, thank you very much. Well, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is number 6, Somerset Council Service Introduction. And very pleased to see Jan Stafford is here to tell us how we're serving our customers 4 months down the line. Jan.
Good morning. I'm just seeing if I can share my slides, but I'm actually getting quite a lot of it. I keep saying poor network quality, so let's try.
I think, unfortunately, we're all having that, Jan. There's a bit of a connectivity issue
That's
down
okay. So
in
can you
this
see
room.
that? No. Yay! It worked. Fantastic. Yes. Well, sorry. Let me move my paperwork. That works. Well, good morning all. My name is Jan Stafford and I'm the Service Director for Customer Services. Thank you for the opportunity today for me to come and introduce my set of customer services to you all. What I thought I'd do is I'd take you through the slide pack that you have. And then what I'm going to do is just take you through some of the services that we provide, the performance that we're currently experiencing, and also some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we're facing. So that's the plan. Okay, so what do we do then? So this slide sets out the key tasks that my service provides on behalf of Somerset Council. And what I'll do is the pack will explore some of these slightly more in detail as we go through. Customer services are really the first point of contact for the authority, whether that be through email, virtual agents, telephony, social media, SMS, web chat, face-to-face. So they will be the first people that they come into contact with. And what we absolutely try to do is to resolve at the first point of contact, because what we don't want to do is, if we can give them the answer, then we don't want to either pass them around, or actually we want to allow services that are delivering to have the opportunity to do so and to focus on our most vulnerable. What we would pride ourselves in, though, is that we absolutely want to add value to the call. We really do. And so we will work really hard in that space. We are also the customer champion, so we'll take the opportunity to challenge practice, to celebrate and share our learning. One of the other things that we do is around this thing around person-centered conversations. That's quite a switch for us. And, you know, we're one of the few authorities up and down the country that actually do this model of delivery. So what we'll do for places like adult social care or children's social care, we will have these person-centered conversations, which means that if very often a number of colleagues or customers may fall below the threshold for intervention, what we will do is we will work with them to think about what may be available to them, both within their own family or community environment, as well as those other people that may be able to help in those community settings. And at the moment, certainly in terms of adult social care, we reduce demand on the back office by over 60% on a daily basis. And on some occasions, we actually go up to 78%, which is quite a phenomenal achievement, actually. So that's the sort of range of services that customer services provide. And like I say, I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. But one of the things I wanted to do is just highlight the many products that customer services deliver for day one as part of our LGR process. So we did actually introduce a new welcome bot. We absolutely transferred a number of customer services from the Capita contract in the Mendip area. And also we established these sort of 19 face-to-face customer access points to align with each of our LCN areas, in addition to our customer service points that we currently have. But the reason for sharing this slide is that even though we created one single number, one single telephony architecture, one single complaints policy, one panel, one strategy, and whilst that might seem very seamless to customers themselves, actually the wiring and the gluing and the amount of things that we had to do behind the scenes to enable this to be really effective is quite challenging. And what we do know is that over the period of weeks, months, we will need to work with services to think about, as they transition and transform, what the opportunities at the front door for us and how we may rationalise some of those procedures, processes and handoffs, because that will be incredibly important. That's our LGR journey. And can I just say, I was absolutely delighted as to how that went, because it was a phenomenal Herculean achievement for teams concerned. What I then thought about doing is just sharing with you something around our welcome bot. And I don't know if any of you have experienced it or taken the opportunity to listen to it. So the welcome bot is quite an innovative thing, and I'll share with you some of the awards that we've been winning in terms of this space. So what happens with the welcome bot is a customer will use our single number, they will phone, and then what the welcome bot will do, it will do an introduction, it will then talk about GDPR, which is our commitment, and then it will ask the customers to what they might like in a couple of words. And then what will happen is that bot will then identify which queue and then pass that. And well, it might seek a sort of, a question of clarification or which area they might live in, and then it will pass that to the appropriate telephony queue for an advisor to speak to them. So it's about directing the traffic to the right place, which is really, really important. If, however, for whatever reason, the welcome bot doesn't pick up, because very often a person might go silent, actually they're not really sure about what to say, or they're confused by the question and answer it in a very long sentence, which the bot doesn't understand. They will have 2 attempts, and then they will go through to an actual human advisor who will then pick up the call, then work with the individual customer to redirect that. What I would say is that in terms of the welcome bot, we've had some really good success in this space, because 85% of the calls that we took and continue to take on day one and beyond are actually successfully managed by that welcome bot, which is really, really good. And the triage, which is the human intervention, we were working around 7 to 12 seconds if that individual did not get success through the welcome bot. And lots of people say, yeah, but why would you use a welcome bot? And it's really important that we do, because of the number and the breadth and depth of services that a new council like Somerset Council will offer. To have an IVR, which is press a button, press a button, press a button, because we offer so many services, I think you'll probably end up with 65 buttons that you would need to press before you get there. And experience shows that actually that's not the best customer experience. So by somebody coming on and saying, I'd like to speak to planning, which area do you operate in, that seems to work much, much better. So the option of having IVRs was not there. One of the things that we're also doing is that we are learning. I think we're, in terms of the welcome bot, we're on version, I think something like 436 at the minute. It really is up in the 400s. So every day we listen to calls, we listen to intents, we look at the sort of 15% that didn't get through and say, hey, can we add another word? Can we add another geography? Can we add another iteration? So we actually start to get the bot really thinking intuitively. We've still got a long way to go, but certainly the intuitiveness of the bot is something that we wanted to do. So moving on, just to let you know, in terms of, I just wanted to put the slide up, and I'm not going to just sort of share with it, but what it just seeks to show is that each of these 65 queues are manned by the customer services team. So when the bot pushes them through, they are manned. Going forward, to try to look after 65 queues is quite a difficult thing. So, for example, at the moment, with a number of services, which may be, I don't know, planning, or they have maybe 4 teams, planning teams, who do maybe it slightly differently or handle it very differently. So at the moment, customer services wrap themselves around those 4 models of delivery. As we go forward and we rationalise to one model of delivery, then of course we will revisit the customer service response in that space, work with the service to try to rationalise that. And so that is quite a task for us, but we're on it and we've got really good conversations happening with services. Moving forward, in terms of performance, how are we doing then in this space? Well, looking at our June data, so this is taken from June 2023, we actually took near on 67,000 calls. We resolved 74% of those at the first point of contact. The actual average wait time was 2 minutes 22 seconds. Now that can really mask exceptional performance. Because it's an average, it can also mask some poorer experiences. So on one line, it could be 40 seconds. On another line, it could be up to 40 minutes. And so what we do is we work really hard, real time, to deploy our customer services to where that demand or that peak is happening. And what we do have of that, 3.5% of that was service failure demand. So that means where an individual may have phoned and asked to speak to an advisor, the advisor will give them the response. If we therefore need professional intervention, it's passed on to the service. If we then pass it on to the service, who are incredibly busy, and the customer doesn't get a response within the day or 2 days or to the expectation as to what they will ring again. And so of those 67,000, 3.5 is where people come back again and ask, you could say, the same question. And we're working really hard with services to try to reduce that. What we also have is 470 social media inquiries and 741 website contact us. What's really important in that space, and I don't know if your colleagues do know or members do know, is that what we do is that even if you come through the contact us form on our website, so you do it digitally, that gets queued with telephony calls. So whether you come in on social media, whether you come in on a call, whether you come in on a contact us form, it gets queued and dealt with and triaged in a priority order. And I think people find if they send in an email that won't get the sort of same immediate response potentially as a telephone call. That's not the case. We do queue them and triage them. So as a way forward, that's what we're trying to encourage people to do. In terms of emailing us, that's one of the best places to use. But of course, we do have other email boxes for professionals and others that come through in a different way, which again, our teams sort out. Sorry, it's just allowing me, it says, looks like something went wrong, so I can't move my slide forward. Oh, there it goes. So just in terms of the other thing I was going to say in terms of satisfaction, do you know, we get the choice, customers are able to leave satisfaction comments if they so wish. In June, 4,096 people completed those surveys, and 83% it was either good or very good, which is really very good. I've talked about the welcome bot, but it's also worth noting that via our customer service points and access points, which will pick up, we had 5,000 visitors, and again, face to face, we resolved 95% at the first point of contact. In terms of awards, it's always worth, I'd love to share this because I'm super proud of them, and to think that we've achieved this already since vesting day. We won 2 awards. The first was an international award. So we were absolutely up against 100 companies globally for the work that we've done on our welcome bot, and we actually won it. which was quite phenomenal achievement on behalf of the team and the work that they've done there. And the second was for our work again on our transformation activity on vesting day and for our bot again, which is rather nice to have. The customer panel, that's the next place. Oh, can you see that? Oh, has it gone on? Mm. Mm. Sorry, I'm on a different slide to you guys. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. So it's just not showing on the screens. Oh, strange.
I've got connection errors, but I think it's a problem.
You think it's connection?
Yeah.
The next slide on my
Yes, that's right. Is that all right? So shall I just crack
Yeah, if
on
you
and
just
use
crack
those?
on, yes,
Sorry, forgive
please,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, so awards. So I'm going to go on to the customer panel next, which is the next slide. And so we do have a customer panel. This isn't just for customer services. This is for the entirety of the authority. We have a panel which exists of members of the public businesses, local interest groups, public service providers. We've got about 420 members of that. They're volunteers. They use the volunteering process to do that. And we actually work with those panel members to co-design, co-produce, and really get them to test and question some of the work that we do, which is really an invaluable service. What we've used it for, we absolutely used it for the website, which we launched our new Somerset Council, and they gave us some great feedback as part of that process. We also asked them to help us shape our customer strategy and our promise and our standards. And also we worked with them in terms of branding our customer access service points. And again, the feedback was phenomenal. What I'm proposing on this slide around what are the benefits, there are many benefits of using those around getting that constructive feedback. Of course, it's that diversity of perspective. It's around developing that empathy of end users. It's thinking about the types of demographics and the models of actually engaging with our customers. What we do is we have a website which is dedicated to that, our customer panel. We have how people can volunteer. That's through our volunteering process. And if our colleagues do or members do want to get in contact and understand a little bit more, we have Gareth Denslow and Melissa, who are our contacts in that space. In terms of customer, I'm just going to pause on this one. We had a customer strategy. Can I say what we have done is that we've literally created a customer promise, which sets out the relationship we want to have with our customers more broadly. And the standards that we've produced are about how we hold ourselves to account for that. We've promised that we will produce a quarterly infographic, and the first one is currently being produced. And members will be cited upon that in the forthcoming weeks. So what other services do we provide? Well, we have customer experience team. So this is the central team who manage the complaints process on behalf of the council. As we know, there's two stages to our complaints process. Very often, the complaints process, of course, is dealt with by the service themselves. That's where we start off and seek to rectify any question, request for service or complaint that an individual may have. And then if that doesn't seek the resolution, then we move to stage 2, where my team will get involved and seek to do some sort of independent challenge. Alongside, then, if we then at the end of that process still find that it's unresolved, then of course they can use the Ombudsman for jurisdiction. In terms of the actual customer experience itself, the performance is a good trajectory for complaints. What I would say is in the first quarter, we've received the same number of complaints as we did combined for the entire year for the authorities previously. So at the moment, the trajectory is looking good, and you can see that from the figures that it is going down, and we're seeking to, the escalations are getting fewer. But we've got some work to do in this area, and we are working with services not only to think, how can actually we resolve them quicker, work with them, how can we actually stop them happening in the first place, think about some of the learning that people have shared and how can we action that as well. So we really are working with services as to how we do that. Right, let's keep going. Face-to-face services, I promise you I'm almost there in terms of face-to-face services. Just to let you know, we do have two types of face-to-face delivery. The PowerPoint does show where those access points are. There's two types. There's one which is around our customer service point. That's where you can actually go in and talk to an individual customer advisor. And as I've talked about the performance in that space, which is good. Around customer service points, customer access points, they're slightly different. And this is where we connect with customers using our assisted digital channels. So we use something called Attend Anywhere, which is basically like using Teams. So an individual can go into those customer access points and they can be connected with a customer advisor if they're not sure how to use the technology, they're not sure how to connect, they're not sure where to find it. People in those spaces, both in libraries and community settings, are available to support them in that process. To be fair, the take-up of that is quite low. It is, from vesting day, it's been quite small. We're working really hard to raise its profile, to work with communities, to work with some of our providers to enable us to get a better space, to enable us to get sort of better traction in that space. Somerset Lifeline, I don't know if members do know, but we also are responsible for the Somerset Lifeline. So this is our emergency response system service offering 24/7, 365 response to our most vulnerable customers. So it's the pendant piece. So advisors will absolutely, if called, at the touch of a button, an individual can make contact with the service. And what of course they will do is they will triage that. Lots of times they'll give reassurance. On occasions, they will then deploy members of the family, but if necessary, they will also deploy an emergency response service. And on top of that, if they really feel it's necessary, we'll also deploy the 999 emergency services to that particular household. The breadth and depth in that area is quite phenomenal. And the response in terms of, you can see the performance of that service. So just in, I think it says May, we received nearly 25,000 calls to that service. It runs during the day and it runs during the evening. But what it also does is it provides a range of out-of-hours services for a number of our services as well. So it's particularly invaluable in that particular space. And of course, we also do the responses and the installations. Right, I've completely dropped out of the system now. Okay, so I am really on my last slide now, which is around some opportunities and challenges, and then I'll wrap up. So what do we want to do within customer services? We really want to spend a lot of time in terms of championing good customer service. My advisors are only good as the information that people provide them with. So building that knowledge and that experience and that content is really, really important to the service. We're absolutely thinking about, we collect a range of data at the front door, and we're working with services to how we can compile that and share that with them to help drive change and improvement. We're also working hard on that 3.5 service failure demand. We absolutely want to learn more from our complaints, and we definitely want to encourage the organisation to really put the customer at the heart of it does by using the customer panel. We also want to resolve more at the front door. We do hand off to services And that's a frustration sometimes to customers. They can't understand why they can't get directly to that particular service. In that service, they may only have two people and both of them may be out of sight, out on one side. So me taking a call from you and just making you hold whilst the service doesn't respond is not a good use of time. So we have absolute categorical arrangements with each service as to how we handle those calls for those services. Some it may take a message, some we may fill in a form, some we will resolve at the first point of contact, some we will absolutely, where appropriate, involve the officers involved. So those are, sorry, forgive me, I really am out of everything now. And then, sorry, I'll just get back up to my slides. And then I'll leave it for questions. In terms of reviewing our face-to-face, we're working really hard in terms of those face-to-face spaces and working clearly with lots of partners. What you will do now is that in any one of our libraries, we've just rolled it out in July, so you can get customer access points for any one of our 34 libraries, which is great. And then the last thing I just want to say is we are absolutely working hard on something called channel shift. So this is about what is the digital offer. So for those customers that do want to self-serve 24/7, we want to think about what sorts of things and extend that offer. Because I'm not so sure in some of our areas, we've thought through some of those process to enable that sort of digital online experience. So that's one thing. The second thing is we're looking at something called a customer engagement platform. And that sounds really horrid, but actually a customer engagement platform means we work as to how we deal with the customer as an organisation. So if a customer wants to acknowledge it, report it, book it, pay for it, check it, track it, be informed of it. At the moment, if you're an advisor or you're a customer, you may have to go through 10, 15, 30 different systems and processes and channels because we don't have one single version of the truth. What we're trying really hard is to connect some of that with the systems that we've currently got. But actually, the holy grail is to think about this customer engagement platform where we share one system, one version of the truth, one experience. And so that's something that we're working on in the background to see if we can improve in that space. I'm conscious that I have taken a little while, but I thought it was really important just to give you a sense of the sorts of things that customer services is doing within this particular area. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jan. That was a comprehensive run through. I mean, I always feel that communication is a much underestimated art, really. I mean, communication, of course, is two-way. It's not only the person who's communicating, it's how it's received and dealt with after that. And whilst we can't control what the question is, we can certainly control what the answer and the response is. And I think what you've just outlined is a tremendous start, particularly from a council that's only been established for 3 or 4 months. And to win the international award, I think, is a tremendous accolade. So many congratulations to you and to all of those involved in that work. Right, I've got a couple of people who want to talk. I've got Andy Dingwall online. I've got Hazel in the room. Andy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. So my question, firstly, absolutely brilliant, very thorough presentation. Thank you for that. I had a quick question. One of your slides showed satisfaction rates of 83%. My question was around, it looks great. I'm sure it is, but is there a benchmark of other councils or unitary authorities that we might be able to kind of rank ourselves in? Kind of following on from that is those customer segmentation pieces. We've got, sorry, I have to take my camera off a second. The customer segmentation, is there a breakdown of what kind of demographics, what kind of people are using the services and the satisfaction rates for each one? And then is there any way to collect feedback from the more digitally disadvantaged? Thank you very much. Those who might not be able to reply to online surveys.
I was going to ask a question later, actually, about whether we've got any data on the ability, either from a sort of knowledge or experience point of view of interacting digitally with the council, simply because you're elderly or you have various other issues, and whether there was any data on the fact that internet and mobile phone coverage is, shall we say, patchy at best, whether you've got any crunching on that, because it was always one of the things that really bothered me about the movement to sort of digital interface with local authorities, was that if people simply couldn't do it because the infrastructure wasn't there, and the more information we have on that and people's inability to contact us, even if they wanted to, I think would be quite important.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and pick those questions off in order. In terms of benchmarking data, it's actually quite difficult to do some of this stuff because very often services deal with across the patch differently. So in terms of adult social care and children's social care, we have a very different delivery model at the front door than many other unitary authorities or those. So it's difficult. However, as a result of then creating a new unitary authority, we just joined a group of unitary authorities where that very question around, is there something that we can do around benchmarking? So I haven't got anything to hand, but it's absolutely on my radar because that's one of the things that we want to do. We want to compare ourselves with others. So watch that space. That's the first thing that I would say. In terms of customer segmentation, demographics, it depends. No, we don't have some of that data. For those where we have an ongoing relationship, so we know the individuals and we know that, and where that's part of maybe a case file or something like that, we do have some demographic information. But very often when somebody phones us, we don't ask for that demographic information. We don't ask that. So we don't have a breakdown of the whole demographics of the types of people that phone us. We know the services that they're requiring. We know the responses that they get. But no, I wouldn't say that we have that segmentation by demographic data, because the fact is that we would have to ask our customers for that information to be able to provide it. Although we would work really hard to think about, are there places where, and it goes back to the next question, which is around digital, are there places where we do feel that we do need to think about that sort of digital inclusion? And so what you'll see is in terms of, the face-to-face, one of the things that we looked about in terms of those customer access points, so a classic example was when we were doing that piece of work, there was a requirement in the business case for us to put a customer access point in each of the LCN areas. And what you'll note is that what we did was we put one in the 17 LCN areas that were required. But what you'll notice, we actually added another 2, because when we did a heat map of those face-to-face and thinking about digital inclusion in those spaces, we realised that actually for some of those individuals living in those spaces would not be able to access it. So we did need to provide the infrastructure should they need to go into those spaces to be able to connect with us and be able to do that. So in terms of that digital, we are working really hard to think about our provision and how we do that. So certainly in terms of face-to-face, we're extending it. So where they are digitally excluded, they can come into those spaces. In terms of data around those that use it, we've just got a tool called Site Improve. And what Site Improve will do is it will tell you how many people came over the web, what they used it for, where they stopped, a heat map where they go onto it and then think, nah, that's not, it doesn't work. So it will provide a whole range of rich data. We've just rationalised that in terms of that channel, and I believe that's the data that will be coming out very shortly. But yes, so we're working with the digital team to provide those sort of profiles alongside complaint information and contact information and quality assurance information to be able to have those conversations with services to say, hey, I'm not so sure that's working in that particular way.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Chair,
you.
can I quickly?
Andy, yes, you wanted to come back.
Yeah,
Andy.
so I wanted to dig in. I understand about the demographics. That was my poor choice of words. I think I used it as shorthand for. So when I mean that, I'm not just looking at 18 to 24 and male or female, whatever it might be, but also their usage of council services. So the segment of customers who use only adult social care services, or the segment of customers who use adult social care services and housing services, and is there a breakdown of or the ability to break down those, maybe portraits is a word I might use in my professional, but I don't know if that makes sense here. But those kind of portraits of customers, that might be work that you do when you're bringing in the new kind of system, CRM system, to bring that single vision of the truth that you talked about together. But is there anything that we can view there? Do we know what the satisfaction for adult social services is
Yes,
by
we do.
itself, for example?
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
just to give you reassurance is that for each of our services, we will have an understanding of the number of users that came through that, the things that they requested, where we would have some of that demographic information, we would have that demographic information, what they thought was really good about it, what they thought was really poor about it, whether or not we received complaints about it. We have that rich picture.
Cool.
And that is a conversation that we would then have with a particular service. So take, for example, waste. One of the things that we're doing with waste at the moment is we know that waste is a particularly high number of calls that come through. But actually, in terms of the things that people can do for themselves and online, we add very little value to some of the calls that come through. People just want to have a conversation. There's a validity to that. But equally, when we're very, very busy and we want to focus on our most vulnerable, that's probably a demand. If we are able to shift it to a digital option, that would be a very sensible thing to do. So one of the things that we've done is on the line, we've said, hey, you can actually do this online through this. And, in the first month of really thinking through that data that we had, it's shifted by 11%. So we have seen a shift from people phoning up and actually thinking about the grade of service and then looking at the quality of that to then doing something more digitally online. So I think, does that answer your question? So we do have a rich data of information of which we use to drive change and improvement.
I think you got a thumbs up there. Thank
perfect.
you, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Right, I've got 4 other speakers. Hazel Prasanki was.
Thank you. The Piper system, the emergency response, do we have now across the whole of Somerset the kind of system we had in Somerset Western Taunton, where we had the emergency response team based at Kilkenny? Has that been rolled out, or have we moved to a model which is more like the rest of the country, where different people are called for different things? Did we have that absolute team that go out still or not?
Yes, what we have is that we have the coming together of 3 parts of the lifeline. So we had the Dean Helpline, we had Sedgemoor, and we also had the South Somerset. So those 3 have come together. So we have one unified Somerset Lifeline service for the authority. And what we do have though, what we recognise is that we have a gap in the Mendip area. So that's one of the things that we're looking at the moment. What I would say, the Lifeline service basically has 3 parts to it. One is around people paying, self-funders. I'd like to pay for this myself. So that's one, which we deal with. And we've got a breadth and depth across the organisation, both in terms of older and younger people, because it isn't just about older people using the service. What we also have is we have providers like housing associations and others that actually utilise that Piper service as part of their offer. And then the third area is that we're currently exploring is with adult social care as to how we build this into that sort of adult social care offer for the authority as well. So those are the 3 types. So yeah, unified service, and we're looking at both funded housing associations as well as integrating it into our adult social care response.
Susanna Hart, please.
On your slide about volumes and performance in June 23, you show that 95% of calls are resolved. Where do you get that statistic from? Is that from the completed surveys? Or is that from somewhere else?
Sorry, forgive me. The performance slide talked about the number of calls that we had received. And then the resolved at the first point of contact is 74%.
Put the slide back up. On the other side of the slide, it says 95%.
Oh, satisfaction.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. They're different things. So the calls received are the calls that come over our switch. So every call that comes into the authority, we record it and respond to that. We know when an advisor then takes that call, once they've completed that, they do something called a wrap up. So they will pick a wrap up code as to what happened with that call. Did I pass it to the locality team? Did I resolve it? What happened to it? And so we know that 74% of those calls received, we actually resolved at the first point of contact. And for face-to-face, we know when somebody comes through the door and asks a question, it's around 95%. The 83% is around satisfaction. So what happens is when an individual customer comes onto the call, they will ask them whether or not at the end of the call, they would like to take a survey and leave some feedback. So very often of the 4,096 people that held on and completed that survey at the end of the call, 83% of them said, and we have the data to prove it, that actually their experience was either good or very good.
Yeah, it's just that 4,096 is only around 6% of the actual total calls.
Yeah.
So
yeah, yeah, it is absolutely.
Really,
which is quite amazing actually that we actually get that many
I
people.
just think that's a tiny, yes, but to me, it feels like an amazingly high figure, but it's only on 6% of the incoming calls. And, you know, I would say from my own perspective, you only complete one of those surveys. If you're really irritated at the end of an interaction, the last thing you want to do is complete the survey. So your kind of picture snapshot is taken most likely from people who were happy, and only 6% are actually answering it. So I just wanted to
yeah, no, that's a very good point. Just to reassure you, the grumpy ones do leave it as well. And I do have a lot of phone calls, and they will rate it between 1 and 5 in terms of their experience. And for every person who rates it a 5, we will listen to the experience and we will seek to do something. But what I would say is, because you're absolutely right, that is a small drop in the ocean of the amount of people that interact with us. Absolutely spot on. But this isn't the only quality assurance that we do around that area. So for each of our services across the piece, we have a highly developed quality assurance process. So we will, and that's multifaceted, to actually explore some of the things that you've just talked about. So we would triangulate it with complaints. In adult social care or some of our other services, the social workers will come in and pick a sample of any call over a profile and say, right, I want to listen to these top 20 calls and listen to them. And we too, within the service, spend a lot of time in terms of looking at the quality of the response that we gave. You're right, that's not included in there because we're not rating it. But I just would like to give some assurance that we absolutely do evaluate a number of the calls, a number of the interactions that come over in addition to those particular customer surveys. So it's part of the snapshot, but you're right.
Okay, thank you. I've got Dawn Denton online and then Dawn Johnson in the room. Dawn Denton, please.
Hello, thank you very much. We all know about grumpy customers. Customer care is not easy. I just have a question really about the contractors, because I have had many incidents where people have the number on roadworks, for example, and there's been emergencies on roadworks over weekends or bank holidays, and those numbers haven't worked. Just what is our relationship really, and what is the policy around those? But also, what is the fallback if those numbers don't work and there is like a big emergency really with some kind of roadworks?
Thank you for that. Uh, um, what I would suggest is that anybody, if that number doesn't work, to phone the single number during working hours. That will definitely get triaged to the highway service, potentially if it's an emergency. So without a doubt, that would definitely get triaged during the day. One of the things that we are doing though at the moment is that we are working around out of hours around highway services. So at the moment, if you were to phone out of hours the single number, you will go through to the police 101. So it will actually go through to that service and then they will triage it. And the challenge is that you may be waiting up to 40 minutes on that queue. It's not an acceptable way of delivery. So we are currently undertaking a review of that service to see whether or not we have capacity within the Lifeline service to cut out 101 and to loop them back when the emergency happens. So we actually do the triage and then we would then contact the duty out of hours highways team to be able to resolve that. They then in turn would then speak to the contractor and as part of their highways contract, they would deploy a response. So that's the way that it works. So yeah, if you've got examples of numbers where it doesn't work, that would be really, really helpful. But my suggestion would be to always use the single number. During work time, it would get triaged out of hours. We're working on a revised service, which hopefully we're seeking to get into place by November of this year.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's always tricky when third parties are involved on assets that belong to the council, things like roads, because more often than not, the council gets the blame when something goes wrong, simply because they can't get hold of the contractor. But it's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you
Dawn
very much.
Johnson. Yeah, Dawn Johnson, please.
Thank you. Really, really useful and fantastic, you know, to see all this positive work going on. I didn't know about the Lifeline. It's my ignorance completely. I didn't know about the Lifeline, and that was one of my questions. Is that something we do make available, or is it something that it gets switched to? Do people need to know that number, or if they phone out of hours, will they automatically be passed on to that service? So that was one question. The other was when you were talking about the reduction to adults social services calls. I think you said there was something like 77% reduction in calls. I'm just curious to know what kind of things they've dealt with that have not ended up having to go to adult social services. Is there a kind of theme on what they're able to deal with? In terms of the customer service points, yeah, appreciate it's really, really early days and you're going to have massive stats from the sound of it at some point. But have you got a sense of which customer service points are being more used than others? And the final thing is, if you do some analysis of what topics your callers come in with, it'd be really interesting to see if that aligns with what we as councillors get approached on, because yeah, it'd be really interesting to see that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Beg your pardon.
Sorry, forgive me. So in terms of the first question, one line, one number, all goes through to the same place. So out of hours, so once we switch over to 5 o'clock, the Lifeline will go through to that place and that individual will pick it up. And they will do exactly the same things they would do during working hours, which is to provide the assurance, contact the family, respond, or call the emergency duty service, emergency services. So in terms of Lifeline, that is the offer that we have. So that's that one. In terms of adults themes, yeah, do you know, we do a lot of this work. And you know, I was looking at it yesterday, and even on the Lifeline, so we, if an advisor takes a call and realises as part of that person-centred, you know, interaction that actually they are below the threshold, they will point them to a range of community options, whether that might be a Meals on Wheels service, a daycare service, something to isolation. And even yesterday, I was saying in terms of we signposted 74 people over the last week the Lifeline service. So they will think about all of those things. And what we do is on a month by month basis, we will work with the adult social care and say, these are the 20 top themes that came through. How can we improve the offer in this space? Where are some of the commissioning gaps? And we've been doing that for a number of years. So it is quite intuitive and quite a rich place that we work in that space. Cap.
Are there any particular questions that get asked that, I mean, it's a huge change in what then gets passed through. And it seems like there's obviously a lot of questions that can be dealt with very quickly. I'm just curious to know what those kind of questions are.
I don't think any of them are that quick, actually. And one of the things that we've noticed is that when we started taking on, historically, an adult's call might be, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds in length. Now the conversation is anything, well, predominantly on average, 26 minutes long. So they will ask a range of questions, because if somebody phones up and they've got a range of needs, we will seek to give them, like I say, whether it be a housing or a sheltered or day accommodation or isolation or Meals on Wheels service or things that they can do for themselves or connecting them with a community response. I mean, it's so vast. Yeah, so vast in that space. Sorry, yes, we do. And at the moment, it's really quite low. I know certainly in some of the places that we were looking at the data in terms of Glastonbury Street, I think it was something like 7. I think it was 7 interactions in a week. Somewhere like Frome, I think it was up to something like 90. So we do have rich data as to the sorts of use of those customer access points. Some of them we've only been running for the last 3-4 months. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is trying to encourage their use. And that's why we're working with comms to do a big piece around launching them and making people aware that they're there. So, yeah.
Just on a quick follow-on, is there a commitment to keep those running, whatever the numbers, for a period of time?
I think that's a really good question, and I think we just need to think about the offer, and that's a jolly good question for members as to whether or not we think that. What I think is really important, though, is the conversation that we can have, is because in many localities, there's citizens' advice, there's another type of voluntary and community sector, there's Spark, and there's Engage, and there's a community council, and there's village agents, and so what I think we need to do is be really clever about how we are creative around the types of options that we think of going forward. So rather than say, we're going to close that avenue, actually we do something in a combined way with another service provider, which actually gives a rich response to that particular customer.
Okay, thank you. Hazel had one small point in the chat about at what point is the customer who phones in invited to take part in the survey? Is it at the beginning of the call or at the end of it?
Sorry, beginning. So the point I was wanting to make was actually, if most of us don't want feedback at the beginning, so you don't press the button or whatever it is you have to do. But by the end of the call, we may jolly well want to make a complaint, and that's the problem. So I can remember in my dealings with the tax office, still not resolved, but I start off saying no, but then after half a dozen calls, I say, yes, I will feedback. Makes no jolly difference there. But I just think if you have a way in at the end to say, I suppose people who are really grumpy will ring back, won't they? They'll let us know. But it's just, yeah, people don't want to participate in that because they assume that there's going to be help.
It's a very good point. It really is a very good point. And what we're trying to do is trying to minimise the time that they have to hold onto the line. But yeah, it's a very good point. But you're right, very often they do represent, and we do have the opportunity to get some of that. But picking up our quality assurance process, we also do monitor quite a number of calls coming over the switch, and we do review those.
Thank you. One last point. You talked about the face-to-face opportunities and you were using libraries and things like that. Did you mention that there's a proposal to expand them, even on part-time basis?
Yes, that's one of the things that we're looking at, but not expand them in isolation. What we need to do is really explore partnership models of delivery. That's what we need to do. Because very often if somebody comes in to speak to us around a customer service issue, very often there's a sort of seamless warm transfer with citizens advice or other sort of key people in that, partners in that sector. So our view is probably not to extend them on our own, but to really think about integrated offers at the front door so we can really make it joined up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking parochially, of course, With Liscombe has got the community office, which is, and if you looked at the map, there's a great big empty space up in the Brandon Hills and the eastern side of Exmoor, which is only served by Dulverton, Minehead, and so something in Rivy would be really good. But I mean, that's since I wonder more members there. It's a bit parochial.
No, it's not parochial. It's a really good question because we are having those conversations with town, city and parish councils, because in town, city and parish council offices, that's a great space if we want to put something like that in there. So yeah, one of the areas we're looking at.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. That was a comprehensive run through, quite an awful lot of work and considerable success. So as I said earlier, congratulations on getting the thing up and running, and let's hope it continues. I think it would be useful to have a sort of feedback every 12 months or so, just to keep an eye on the stats and things like that. But for the meantime, thank you on behalf of the committee. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 7, and I'm sorry we're running a bit late. This is the annual approval as sole shareholder of the homes in Sedgemoor, and this is an update. I don't know whether Chris is going to give us an introduction, and Dave Baxter as the strategic housing manager, who will give a short presentation. Is Dave online?
I think Dave's online. So if Dave's online, Dave can certainly lead, and I'll just contribute if need be.
Okay. Dave Baxter online. Are you happy to introduce this?
Yes, certainly. So as obviously 3 members present in the room will understand, board members, membership of the board, captors in of Homes of Sedgemoor is captured in Articles of Association. Homes of Sedgemoor is a registered company of which the council is the sole shareholder. So the council approves obviously 3 council members to that board. As part of the decisions, annual decisions required, that is a approval of the Homes of Sedgemoor annual company accounts and approval of external auditors, which has for a number of years been Bishop Fleming, who have done a good job for us, and we want to continue that arrangement. So there will be a decision paper going to council to approve those. So as sole members, the council is equivalent to the shareholder in a company, limited by shares, and subject to any special provisions in the Articles of Association. Members of that company have several powers and ultimate control over that company. Therefore, it's for the council to approve the auditor's accounts and the appointment of the auditors. In a nutshell, that is what is happening. If there's any comments and questions, then happy to take them.
Okay, so this is essentially just an administrative process to approve the sole shareholder status. Are there any questions about this? Oh, good. And I don't think this is a decision for this committee, but it is something that needs to be run past the committee. Presumably it's the exec that takes the final decision, is that right? Or is it a full council?
It will. Yes.
Right, okay. Well, if everybody's happy, Hazel, you're okay. Right, well, on that basis, I think we have, I've invited comments and questions. Everybody seems very content with what we've been told and what the process is. So we will move on, and thank you, Dave Baxter, for that introduction. Thank you, Chris, for staying for it. Item 8, the date of the next meeting. As I said at the introduction, we are the heads of all the scrutiny committees in liaison with democratic services, are investigating the possibilities of increasing the frequency of scrutiny meetings. Jamie is having a meeting tomorrow to see what the resource implications are, and I suspect it's not simply people, although that will be a key component. It's probably office space as well. And on that basis, is it appropriate to mention that you're all going to put us on a bus one day and take us around the county? I think we may have to make our own way, but I think there is a proposal for scrutiny committees and possibly other committees to move around the county rather than being Taunton centric. Do you want to expand on that, or is it top secret? Should I not have mentioned it?
But I don't think it's top secret. No, there is a directive that has come that we're asking us to look to take many of our committees around the county so that we're not too Taunton centric. Myself and the clerks who support me on all the scrutiny committees at the moment are currently working out a schedule certainly for the meetings from now through to the end of the calendar year. Obviously, we will update you all when we've agreed a suitable programme, and I will let you have your minibus ticket to join the bus.
We've all got bus passes.
I am, yeah.
There was a suggestion, I think, and although I have to say it was only a suggestion, that the next meeting, the October meeting, might be held in Yeovil, but oh well,
Yeah, I think it's
December. Anyway, these things will be confirmed in due course. Very exciting, isn't it? We're being allowed out. Well, under control, it has to be said.
Very controlled position.
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along and for your contributions. Oh, forward plan?
Have anything for the future?
We haven't at the moment, other than the things I've jotted down. The forward plan, we're looking at the Home Finder. Housing Directorate training will be coming back, and the CCTV, I think, is penciled in for October. Chris, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's been a report going to Resources Scrutiny in regards to the council's financial position, and there was a recommendation made that the individual scrutiny committees consider any overspends that occur within those individual areas of responsibility. So we would need to bring forward a report to you at a future meeting date to reference any cost pressures or overspend. So at the moment, communities is not identifying an overspend. However, we don't yet have full oversight of all of the expenditure, so we're still going through the dynamics systems reporting process and that business intelligence. So I think it is fair to say that at a future meeting we would want to bring something forward just to identify where cost pressures are occurring within communities, just to meet that requirement.
Okay, thank you. We had a list, we went through a list at the last meeting, I think, of potential items which have been put on a tentative list. I'll revisit them with Jamie over the next few days and send them around the committee so you can have a look at them and add and subtract as you wish. Other than that, thank you all very much, and safe journey home on this lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Chair.